Welcome, everyone, to another Native Paranormal Crossroads. We are joined by the intrepid Paranormal Rangers, Jonathan Dover, Michele Meiners, and Stan is in a mysterious place. I'm also joined by Laura and Dale. Welcome to the show, everybody. Today we are talking about ancestral lineages and all of that stuff that goes with the ancestors who have had a challenging life to pass off the torch to us so we may pass it off to our children and beyond. Michele, Jonathan, how are things going with you today?
Pretty good. Thank you.
Yeah, doing good.
So, lineages. What can you guys say? What is a lineage first in your guys' definition?
To me, a lineage is where you come from, your grandparents on back through history as far as you can trace it. Some people can go back to the 1400s, back in merry old England, and find out that they were their great grandmother was a European princess. But for us, it mainly goes back to the 1860s when they started recording census numbers, and natives were given numbers to keep track of them, so to speak, on the reservations. So before that, we can look back, but it's not. How would you say? In a legal sense, it's not acceptable, but we can still look back further.
For me, lineages it's telling the narrative story of the people that we belong to and within our own family line, and the appendages of marriages and such, and the oral histories of that have been handed down about these individuals' lives, where they came from,
How different clans have come together.
how we've come together in our bloodlines, how we've survived. For Native Americans, our lineages are very special because it is one of survival. And, we were 5,000 strong at one time across the North America, and now we're only 550 strong. So, but we survived whatever came our way.
And just so everybody knows, that's 5,000 tribes, and 500. It's actually 574 recognized tribes that the government actually recognizes today.
So, how do lineages survive in this modern world of homogenization of cultures?
Well, I've been very fortunate in my bloodline, doing my lineage, I guess, ancestral charts. Um, I don't know how this happened. Thank goodness my ancestors. I don't know if they were thinking about anything, but marriages is marriages within their clan, within their tribe. And I belong to three. I'm 100% Native American, made up of three different tribes. And I think when you talk about the homogeneity of how we keep that bloodline, it was just, I guess, maybe one of fate. And with a combination of several tribe bloodlines. That's for me.
Yeah, for me, I'm 3/4 Native, and then I'm 1/4 Filipino, which is a different type of Native. But I have real interesting stories on all four sides from history.
So, do you guys consider yourselves to be the living ancestors of the now? Which is a statement that Andrew's used many times, which I love.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And in today's world, there's like mixed bloods, and it was really interesting. My daughter is dating a young man, and he calls because he's got part, non-native in him. He calls himself the mixed blood people. I thought that was really cute because we're not total native; we're the mixed blood people. I went, oh, that's an interesting description of what you give yourself.
And
I
it
thought that
feels
was
like there's so many different lineages, so many different experiences. Like obviously the
hmm
Native Americans have their oral traditions, oral teachers, but then on the flip side, you'd get some lineage which have gone through abuse for millions of years. So it's like there's loads of different experiences out there. So as a soul, as you come in, what's the experience of this lineage? What's happened before me? What am I coming in with contracts and so on? So it's like there's just a vast amount of experiences through many millions or how many lineages are out there.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's really interesting. The Native Americans, and I don't know, these are certain tribes, but they like to keep the bloodline pure. When I was growing up, and not to detract from my mother and father's relationship of their marriage, there was not an acceptance of my mother being in that family because she was Navajo. And my father should have married a Pawnee lady or someone of the Plains Indian tribe. So it was very apparent that prejudice was still there, but then as I've grown older and understood the reason why is because they wanted to keep the bloodlines pure, and so there is this kind of systemic prejudice that occurs even within our tribes, not so much
Well,
today, but back in the 60s, 70s when I was being raised. Go
well,
ahead, John.
I've also seen prejudicial attitudes. My parents ran into the same thing. My dad was half Navajo and half Filipino. My mother was Southern Cheyenne and what they used to call Kiowa Apache. They call it Apache Tribe of Oklahoma now. And there was some resentment about her being with my father from his Navajo side of the family. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
but in my career, I also experienced that. I actually had people, I don't speak Navajo, and I was working on Navajo. So we would get elderly people every now and then come into the
Oh yeah.
station, and you start talking to them, and they start talking to you in Navajo. And I would tell them, I'm really, really sorry. I don't speak Navajo. Is there somebody that can translate, or do you speak English? And some of these guys, they would get just bent out of shape, and they'd start in on me, what's the matter with you? How come you don't speak Navajo? You're not even Navajo. What am I doing talking to you? And all this stuff. And I'd shut them up by telling them, well, they wanted somebody smart for this job. And their mouths would just, And then I'd explain to them that my grandmother back in the 1930s, 1920s or 30s was actually involved in one of the early relocations where Navajo students were taken out of schools and shipped off to Tucson to pick fruit. From there, she was shipped to Los Angeles to work in
Mm-hmm.
the industrial factories. And the crazy thing about this with the boarding schools is that it was cheap child labor. And what they could do, the schools would get a kickback of the money that was paid to to the student. So the student would have part of their wages taken out and given to the school for providing that basically slave labor. And it was systemic issue for many, many years until probably the early 60s when a lot of that started stopping. So she ended up in Los Angeles where she met my grandfather. He was working as a chauffeur. She ended up with domestic help for some rich people in Hollywood, and of course they had a blooming romance there and got together. And so, I can imagine what it was like for her to bring him home and say, hey, this is my boyfriend or my husband, and my great grandmother probably wasn't too pleased about it.
I appreciate you saying that, Jonathan, because I think what was happening, during the assimilation process of boarding schools and losing our cultural traditions, we also have lost our language. And part of our lineage is very concentrated in our language. That's where the medicine comes from. That's where the secrets of, I wouldn't say the secrets of the ancestors, but the secrets of life and the traditions and the ceremonies and such are oral. We are an oral tribes and clans, and however, whatever you belong to. And I think throughout history, when you talk about the modernization, how is it being handled? It's not. Our language is being lost. The medicine is being lost. That's why it is so important that we revere our ancestor medicine elders. And to learn medicine takes
A
a whole
lifetime.
lifetime.
Yeah.
A
Yeah.
lifetime.
I would tell the people that my grandmother, in being sent off like that, in being in boarding school, she went to Fort Defiance boarding school.
Mm-hmm.
And she told me that one of the punishments, aside from being whipped for speaking your language, even in a whisper, if you were caught, was to put, they used to make something called lye soap.
Oh
And,
yeah.
and they used to make them hold it in their mouth for, I don't know how long, until they just, and lye burns.
Mm-hmm.
And that was to teach them, you don't be speaking your language, you don't be saying anything like that, you speak English. And they were put into residential boarding schools.
Mm-hmm.
So the formation of the Navajo police was actually started as truant officers. Navajo police were known as the boogeyman. And
Yeah.
the result of that is, even today, mothers will knock on the wall and say, yeah, boogeyman,
Mm.
you better go to
Boogeyman.
sleep. And so that's common to see that practice still done, because the Navajo police would come and knock on your door and demand that any children that were there be taken to boarding school. And you have to understand that some of these boarding schools are as far away as Pennsylvania. And kids would literally die from loneliness, from disease, from malnourishment, from mistreatment. It was a pandemic all across the United States where these boarding schools were located. And then there was a reservation system set up in the late 40s and early 50s for on the reservation itself. So kids were kept in the boarding schools, except for maybe summer break. And then they'd go back to boarding school. So they weren't raised by their parents, they were raised by the boarding school. And when you get generations of this happening, you lose that culture, because now the new parents, don't know how to raise their kids. They don't know the traditions and the cultures, and so they put them in boarding school because they went to boarding school, and if it was good enough for them, it's good enough for their kids.
And
Um,
you don't defy the authority.
right
That was
now,
beaten into them too.
when we went to Iraq and defeated them, I was laughing because I says, how come they didn't set up boarding schools over there? They could have put the families in substandard housing like they do here. Um, they could have, shaved their heads and their beards. Even little children, I guess, have beards over there, and they they could have assimilated them and taught them democracy and I pledge allegiance and everything else, and sing America the Beautiful, and you know just have the same system, and we already had the teachers available. We could have just shipped them over. But of course, that's just my humorous way of thinking about things, superimposing what we went through, to say, well, we could have, in a few generations, we could have had America over there.
Yeah, and I know you've told that story before, Jonathan. What's really interesting, though, is with the assimilation of boarding schools, and my ancestors were taken to Pennsylvania to a place called Carlisle Indian School, present day Dartmouth University. And their education, they were forced to have an education. On one aspect, my great grandfather was the one that would, and my great grandmother were sent there to Carlisle Indian School. They must have gotten a premier, supreme education, because what happened into the rest of their lives is my great grandfather was roommates with the great Jim Thorpe, the Olympian runner, decathloner, so on and so forth. They were roommates, and they also played football. So that part of the natives acclimated. And as a young boy, I know that Jim Thorpe ran away, went back to Oklahoma, but the punishments were pretty severe when they would run away. But apparently they assimilated. But I grew up, my great grandfather always would tell us kids around the drum. He kept his way because his ways and taught us by the drum. We'd have to sit around the drum as 5-year-olds, and he would pound the drums. Okay, it's time for stories. And he would always talk about being an Indian scout, and he got a congressional medal for it and stuff. So he said, one thing we need to do is get along with the white man. That's what he would tell us as kids, get along with the white man. Because he was wise in the fact that we were going to be assimilated into this culture. So, but deep down underneath, he always was traditional. And I always respected him about that. He went on to be working with Oppenheimer on the Manhattan Project, and then became a part of the Atomic Energy Commission. So he played the role very well. And I'm really proud of that, the fact that but he also spoke the language. And today we have a family Bible, and we have our Native American names. So that's why lineages are so important and in our culture. And Jonathan has a rich culture as well on both sides, his mother and father. And the stories are infamous because, it tells us who we are today and where direction we're going. And it's really interesting because in the description title, Ancestor Spirits, on the more etheric side of things, our ancestors still come to us. The people that I'm talking about have come to me through ancestral, moments when either I need that protection or I need knowledge. So that's the importance of our lineages, as being Native Americans.
I'm a firm believer that every human being has a spiritual connection to their ancestors. And the
Right.
journey of destroying our oral teachers and historians during the industrialization age was intended to surgically remove the connective fibers and tissue the oral teachers taught us about connecting to our ancestral pasts, no matter what culture war spread throughout the world. Everyone does it a little different. Um, I come from a 100% Greek background, even
Mm-hmm.
though the Greeks were enslaved and invaded thousands of times over 2,000 years. The cultures that survive, there's a North versus a South. That's really what the culture is there. The clans of the North are different than the clans of the South. The
Right.
clans by the ocean are different than the clans in the center. There's still a clan system, though, and many of them lost their post name. So you would just have your John from this village, your John's cousin John from that village. And it wasn't until the late 1800s, during the Greeks' independence, did they start giving last names. Okay, and did the naming system reemerge after thousands and thousands of years of European disasterhoods, that they did to all the European nations that were over there. Okay. what came out of that was a culture that had a forced king put on them, because that's
Mm-hmm.
what Greece had. Europe's figured out, all right, Greece needs a king. This king will marry this princess. This will tie European countries together. That didn't happen here in the States. We had political empires and economic empires take over that created the boarding system that you're talking about. Canada had it, Mexico had it. The boarding system somewhat was pre in existence in England and in the country of India too. It was a model they knew well how to exploit people with. Okay? But now in these modern days, where enough education of the truth has come out of how destructive these boarding schools were, how destructive these practices were, and on the journey to healing, how does the next generation, the existing ancestors that are 10-year-olds old, 12 years old, 18-year-olds, 20-year-olds, how do they come together to be the new oral teachers and historians? We are presenting these shows not to be the modern oral teachers historians because we simply are right now. We're not assuming anything. We're actually doing so that a future generation has a legacy to work with. So our work here is legacy work.
Yeah, one of the things that I found out about myself, I mean, I grew up in Los Angeles, and so that's about as culturally neutral as you can get, I guess.
Yeah.
And we knew we were native,
Mm-hmm.
but uh, my dad was a deacon in the church. It was an independent church called First American Indian Church. And so the draw there was that natives from all over the city would come in, different tribes, and worship there.
Mhm.
It would be, if you're into denominations, it would be more closely aligned with what you would see with Southern Baptist
Mhm.
teachings and doctrine. And so I grew up in that church. Back in those days, church was kind of an all day thing. You didn't even go. You ate lunch there, and the ladies would make fry bread and stew and everything else. So I grew up with that background. Uh, when later on we started to um, understand that we were native, as I grew up, we learned how to bead, we learned how to do different crafts, work with buckskin, things like that. But that was just kind of a taste of what we were doing. Um, Later on, when I became a ranger, uh, you have to know a lot about the culture. In fact, back when I took the test, there was actually a whole section on culture and language. And at that time, I took a 0 on that section, but I still had enough points to be a ranger. So, one of the things that I did initially was that I studied the culture. I read every book I could. Uh, I just assimilated all that culture back on the Navajo side to understand what it was that I was doing and what was required of me through cultural rules and mores. And I became rather good at it to the point where I was talking with medicine men and handling archaeological crimes, which most Navajos won't even get near. But medicine men taught me how to behave at those places and how not to take any loose spirits home with me, so to speak. So, how to protect myself. And that formed the basis for where I'm at today with the paranormal stuff on the Navajo side. So that was my journey, but I had to study. Stan had to study, um, and Michele also had to study to learn the background in her various tribes.
I made
Absolutely,
an, I just made
Jonathan.
an, I just made an interesting association. So my parents were first generation immigrants here, even
Mm-hmm.
though my grandmother on my mom's side was born in the United States in 1916. But the family moved back in 1939 to Greece. Bad choice
Mm-hmm.
right before the war. And then they got stuck there during the war. And my mom was born there during the war, and my dad was born there during the war. But my dad was a native. But when my mom moved back with my grandmother, the Greek church, the Greek Orthodox Church, is it didn't matter if you were Northern Greek, Southern Greek, hillbilly Greek, fisherman Greek. It's where anybody could get together who were Greek. And like you said, shared culture. I remember learning the Greek dancing, the Greek languages. Even though my parents didn't want me to have an accent, that's why I didn't go to Greek school. They didn't want me to be different. They wanted me to be as American as possible. But I have all this Greek culture in me, from the fishing, the swimming, the all that, the cooking, all that's there because church was as much a cultural joining as it was a religious.
So
You know,
I've actually had a lot of questions online from people asking, well, what do you consider, your spiritual background? And so I'll just state it right up front here. I consider myself born again Christian by faith. And that's the reason why I've studied uh, the Bible. I've gone to a Bible Institute to study for about 3 years, the Greek, the Latin, all of that stuff. And there's only two things really that it comes down to for me that I cannot explain away that happened in time, space, dimension, history. One is the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Mhm.
And the second one is the conversion of Saul of Tarsus to the Apostle Paul.
mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So when you're
Beautiful.
talking about apologetics, I can't explain those away. And the more history you get into, and the more you delve into the archaeology, it just confirms stuff. And then you have people like Dr. Simon Greenlee, who put Harvard Law School on the map, uh, going to Israel to disprove the resurrection. And after his study over there, he actually became a Christian and recanted all the stuff that he had said that it wasn't true. So you get all this going on, but I studied it. I wasn't taking it at face value. Um, I guess in my sense, I have to have evidence and proof um, to satisfy myself. But I do get that question a lot, and people actually get online and they say, "You guys are messing with this stuff. You're going to hell because this is all demon activity," and on and on and on. But that's my background, and that's always in the back of my mind: is could this stuff be demonic in nature? Um, you know, some of it is not. It's just uh, dimensions explain a lot of it. So,
And some of it is just superstition taken too literally.
right, right. But we all look at things through the lens of our upbringing,
Yes, and our
and
faith.
yeah, so we can't help but interpret things,
Right.
and interpretation in the true sense of the word, that you're interpreting things within your own life through the lens of what you've been taught and how you've been raised.
Like you, Jonathan, I was raised in a Christian home of two major religions, um, and have studied thoroughly these religions, the Bible, the
Mhm.
King James Version, and other written, doctrine. Um, and it's really interesting. Again, your belief systems. I have like you have a testimony of Christ, and we call him the Great Creator. Father Creator in the Native way. In Christian way, we call him God. God the Father and Jesus Christ. So we also were simulated in our religious belief systems Although it's really interesting in some of our tribal traditions, it is all Christ based. And so when they start saying that it's demonic, our sweats are Christ based, it is a representation of how he taught us as Native Americans, the way we needed to learn in our ceremonies. And, we're interconnected with that religious goodness because we're not savages, and it's not too long ago that the assimilation process, I mean, we're talking the 1960s when things started to change, the revolution to the 70s. Jonathan and I and you guys, we all went through that reformation, and even of marriages. And, again, the reason why that came out in the 50s, it was you stuck with your own. You stuck with your own and into the early 60s. And that's what my reason for saying earlier on that, there were problems within our own families trying to keep the bloodline pure, is because that's what they were taught. So there was systemic prejudice, even in religion, for us. And so if you weren't Christian, we were considered savages and so on and so forth. And today we're very spiritual. We're very spiritual, not in maybe an organized sense of religion, but we're very spiritual because that's just who we are within our DNA, what it is. And so my parents grew up in a Christian way because they were forced to live that way. And my ancestors, my grandparents, great grandparents, all lived a Christian way. Always, but I always felt that even their traditions of their culture and the things that we were taught were always Christ-based. There's a goodness in it, So for someone to misrepresent who we are because it doesn't sound the same as them becomes a problem for them, not for us, because we already know who we are. So this is quite interesting how we're
and
perceived.
and it needs to be stated up front that this whole idea of assimilation included religion. The idea that you would be assimilated into Anglo society, you were the churches were brought in and
Right,
given a mandate to um, to get rid of the heathen, throw the heathen out, and
Right.
and make a good Christian out of them.
Make you as waspy as possible.
Right.
That
right.
So
was the goal. Waspy. You may not have been white, but as close to a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant through culture, religion, and the way you would think.
yeah,
Right.
so for natives, they were kind of brought into this church atmosphere. But understand this: in order to be a Christian in a lot of these churches, the majority of them, you had to throw away your culture. It was mandated that way.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my mom and my dad did that. My grandparents did that. Um, and, my grandmother was punished for speaking her language. My mother went to Riverside Boarding School, which is in Anadarko, Oklahoma. And they punished them for trying to speak their language. So, all that was part of it was lost. Um, the church itself, that I can remember elderly leaders of the church that were Anglo talking amongst themselves, saying, "Well, they need to marry people of their own kind."
Right.
Yeah, this is coming from church members that are there to serve you, and it was like, my dad, like I said, was a deacon, and he was a song leader. So, that's how I grew up, was this idea that, you didn't talk about your culture. And if you went to powwows, that was going to the playground of the devil. And I was a deacon in my church, and I had
Mm-hmm.
problems with some of the members because I would dance in powwows. But the powwow is nothing more than natives getting together and renewing friendships and having a good time together. It's not this sinful debauchery and orgies, that people think they are.
And I think it's important as well to add that respecting other people's choices and religion and how they see faith and what they connect to is so important, not judging someone. And the issue we have is people attacking people for their certain beliefs. And for me, as I grew up, I went to a Mormon church, Christianity church, I went to a Buddhist center, and I went to many different experiences. And for me, it was about finding that faith connection. Even at the young age, I used to love going into church and listening to the music because it made me feel great. And as I grew older, you saw all of this separation with people attacking each other for you believing in this, for you believing in that. And I feel like moving forward, we have to respect everyone's faith and all come together and say, you believe in this, I believe in that, but we can still get on and we can still have fun and we can talk about things instead of crossing each other over all the time.
And finding that common ground, isn't it, between the different beliefs and religions and so on, rather than what are the differences, what have we got in common?
Well, there's a really long joke that talks about this guy trying to talk a guy off the bridge that's got ready to jump, and pretty soon he says, "Well, are you religious? What kind of religion are you?" And the conversation keeps going. What brand of religion do you practice? What subset? What and the questions keep on going until they get down maybe 10 levels, and then he says, "Are you this northern conference or southern conference of this thing?" And the guy says, "Northern conference," and he pushed him off the bridge and says, "Die, heretic." So we have this, we nitpick is what we do, because people need to measure up to our standards.
Yes.
And that's a really sad commentary, that we don't accept people on their own. It's just like people today, they say this country was founded on Christianity. It was, our founding fathers were actually deists.
Yes.
And a deist is that, God started all this and then just let it run on its own, in a nutshell. So,
Jonathan, I always tell my children, I said, it's good to have some form of knowledge of a God in Christ, but it's very personal. It is a personal relationship to deity. And so, I think sometimes when you come to find that there's an organization trying to control, and today I think you say it all the time, I don't trust the military, and for a lot of our government too. Is it really in God they trust? And so we've kind of swung the pendulum, and there's a lot of people out there who become atheists and have lost their connection. So when we talk about a connection, not only religiously, we're talking about a connection back to our ancestors. So this is why we revere our ancestors so much, so we could have that connection ongoing, and to teach our children about the ancestral connection, because again, another way of getting us through our lives and teachings, and because we're like I said earlier, we're still here. We've not gone away, even though our numbers have dwindled from the 5,000 to the 575. I get varying numbers sometimes when I hear people say 550, 575. But it's a real interesting story. I'm going to share on the lighter side. I have been working on a dance shawl for my granddaughter. If you want to know how you hand down your ancestral traditions, every graduation that comes to the female of our family from the Plains Indian side, each of us at our graduation have gotten a Native American dance shawl. And it was made by the loving hands of an aunt or a grandmother or a sister. And I have taken the last 3 days making this shawl. And how I'm going to teach I'm so sorry about the background. Our crest is the rose, and the shawl represents protection and respect. And there are traditional colors: red, teal, and purple. Those are our traditional colors. And what it represents is solidarity between the women of the tribe. And so when we go out to dance, it's one of solidarity, that we all belong to one group, and that we're all women looking towards the same thing. And so some of these traditions, I've handed this down to my daughter. Now it's my granddaughter who will receive one of these, and I've written a storyline around behind it, because my youngest sister never got her shawl, and I'm going to make one for her. I found that out yesterday, and I'm going to tell her the story behind it, because my aunt, who passed on, and now I have an heirloom. I didn't appreciate it as a teenager, and he does. I always thought it was beautiful, and I took care of it, and now it's an heirloom, and it by the loving hands of somebody, because I have made several of them. I understand the work that goes into this, and then I also understand what's behind it is the solidarity between women.
Mhm.
And the representations of our family crest is the rose, which represents protection, and some other courage and strength.
So
And
as
that
well,
has been, what's that?
the shawl represents returning home as well. So returning
Yeah,
wherever you are.
the rose. And my middle name is Rose, so I was named after that tribal name. But it's really interesting. These are the things. These are these are the simple things that we get to hand down as part of our culture and tradition. So it's been an emotional enjoyment, I could say, a joy to put this together, because every time I tied a knot in the fringe, it's a beautiful, and I'll post it on the website. It was done with a labor of love. And I just kept thinking about my ancestors, grandma, great grandma, Auntie Birdie, who made and then to have a wonderful conversation with my sister, she goes, I bought the materials, but I haven't had time to make it. Well, she makes moccasins, and she's doing other things for me. Like Jonathan says, I was not raised in that type with the regalia, and I'm collecting right now, and I'm learning from the Rangers. And Jonathan is a sun dancer. Is that okay to say, John?
No, it's not a sun dancer. It's
Oh,
Sundance is a completely different ceremony.
okay.
Um, I was going to say that when you held it up and it was kind of disappearing in front of you, I was going to say, "Oh my God, she's making the cloak of invisibility."
Yes, yeah, Geronimo.
but in my culture, in one of my tribes, the Cow-Apache, or the Apache tribe of Oklahoma, I belong to a warrior society. And that society is called the Blackfoot Society. Now, the warrior societies were there to protect the people. So these are your soldiers, and they also double as police. They maintain order in the camp. And so, you had all this happening. In that society, they call it a Manatee society.
Mm-hmm.
The Manatees are the warriors. Now, back in the day, you had Kasawis. These are the children's society. So they're already starting at the time of a child. They could actually grow up to be teenagers until they're deemed worthy. And somebody from the Manatee Society will grab them and say, now you're in the adult group. So now you're going to be a full-fledged warrior, and we're going to teach you. After that, when you start getting old and wise, you're put into the Kinlatiti Society. The Kinlatitis are your planners, your generals, your people that know how to wage war and the tactics involved. And then you have another group that's called the Contraries. The Contraries are kind of like a commando group. Um, they're some of your best warriors. But on the battlefield, when you're yelling back and forth and the leaders are giving orders, attack, attack, retreat, retreat. Um, these guys are told every command they give is backwards. So if they say retreat, retreat, that means attack. If they say attack, that means get back. And if they say go to the left flank, that means go to the right flank. So their job was to actually cause confusion on the battlefield, wherever they were. And then you had another society, and this one just tickles me to death. It's a women's society. So the women had their own society, but their society is secret. Isn't that great? Their society is secret. It's
Solidarity.
It's called the Owl Society,
Right.
but and I think for natives, owls are kind of like harbingers of death and destruction and everything else, and that's really what a woman can do to you. So, as we all know. So, it's amazing that they would pick the owl as their mascot. So not much is known about that society, but they had a women's society that kept to themselves and did things in secret. And so you've got all these stages, and most tribes had something similar.
Right.
The kids would, the rabbit society, they have their own little dances. They hop around looking like rabbits with their hands up, and then sometime when they're teenagers, they're snatched and told you're no longer a child, you're an adult now, so now you're going to learn to be a warrior. So yeah, I dance in that society, and when I can, but it's grueling. It's you could call it a torture dance of sorts, because if you can imagine wearing wool leggings, long sleeve shirt, otter turban with an otter dragger, your moccasins, bells, bone bandoliers, a fan, and carrying a spear or a crook staff, and dancing with this stuff in 117-degree heat with 90% humidity. When I danced over there, I would lose an average of 10 to 15 pounds over 3 days. And you have a whip man.
Mm-hmm.
The whip man's job is not to see if you're comfortable. You don't leave. Once you sit down on that bench, you're there for the duration, and you dance every dance. You don't say, "Oh, I'm going to take a break and go get some water and go visit, with people back here." You're there all day long, from about noon until sundown, after sundown, and then the next day, same thing. The next day, the same thing. So starts Friday. Friday is considered the dancers' day. That's when nothing really is going on, and the dancers can shake out their gear. Saturday, it honors veterans, and so everybody wears red. The first day, everybody kind of wears green on the top, and that's to talk about renewal. The second day, everybody wears red to honor veterans, and the last day is family days, where families are honored. So very, very rigid, um, but very enlightening. And if you're doing the dance right and you're exhausted toward the end, it's euphoric, and you can get yourself in trouble. It's almost like walking a razor's edge, as far as whether you're going to collapse from heat exhaustion or you're going to hit and maintain that euphoric feeling and get done and peel your clothes off, because you're just white. All your clothes are white sweat, and hit a cool shower and recover until the next day.
I'd be dancing laying down at some point, just moving my
Yeah.
heart rate down.
Dan, good to see you. Glad to see you're
Very
done with your secret squirrel meeting.
Oh yeah,
He's out of the land of mystery.
yeah. I'm here.
Hi, Stan.
Hello. Hi.
We're just talking about histories and our people, and what we suffer from. Just so people know, we suffer from what they call generational trauma, and it's kind of like a long-term PTSD that there's not much of a cure for. You just learn to live with it. There's been a lot of bad things done over the years. We've survived. The Navajo Nation has gone from about 3,000 to 5,000 people that were taken to Bosque Redondo to now about 500,000 Navajos. So, go forth and multiply.
Is that in Is that in 4
age.
generations?
Yeah. So, that's, but my great grandmother went to Bosque Redondo. And part of our history there is she actually escaped as a girl and made her way back home. So, we told that to the people at Bosque Redondo National Monument, and they were absolutely stunned. And they said that they had heard about some of those incidents, but they didn't really. They were trying to get our story down on paper so that they could present it.
So in 4 generations, they went from 5,000 to 500,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting recovery journey. And how many of those oral teachers and historians survived to help service those 500,000? How many are modern realized, meaning grew up much like you guys, went on a normal life, didn't have the teachings early in their life. It was only in their professional lives that they discover the importance of them.
Well, it's changed, and not necessarily for the better. My grandfather was trained as a medicine man from a very early age, and back then you were trained as you would classify it today as a general practitioner. You were trained in everything. And then later on in his 20s, he became a born-again Christian, and later on a Christian Reform minister. But he used to talk to me about the skinwalker phenomenon and some of the other things that were happening and give me really good advice on it. Because he said, as a medicine man, you're taught everything. You're taught the good things, you're taught the bad things, because you need to know how the bad things were formulated in order to stop it and heal it. So today, what we're seeing is we have basically eye, nose, and throat specialists. We have medicine men that only maybe do one ceremony, and that's all they can get in to learn. So the general practitioner medicine man is getting less and less, and now they're starting to see these other guys come up that only know 1 or 2 ceremonies, and so it's a loss of that culture. Also, medicine bundles have now been included as patrimony items belonging to a tribe. So we actually have a medicine bag bank, so to speak, where all these medicine bundles are kept from people that have passed away and their families have donated it to the tribe. And they're watered, they're fed, and they're saved for up and coming medicine men that might need that particular bundle. So
wow, that's beautiful. A medicine bundle bank.
Yeah.
Wow, what ingenuity right there.
Yeah, ingenuity. Right?
Yes, ingenuity.
So
Stan, I'd love for you to share a story about your ancestral. We've been talking about our lineages and where we've come from, the history of our people.
Yeah. Um, I do have some ancestry on the Irish Irish culture, in that I was told that there were two of my relatives, two men that uh, came to this country uh, by way, ending up going through Manchester somehow, and uh, came to America. And these two individuals intermarried with two women that were Cherokee,
Mm-hmm.
and that uh, were their families were a part of what is known as the Trail of Tears,
Mm-hmm.
and traveled to the area in Oklahoma, and ultimately my grandfather ended up in Missouri, uh, working in the coal mines, and but my my grandmother from Oklahoma, uh, from what I can tell, my grandmother or my great grandmother was a very stern woman, a very um, had a very strong look of ancestral Cherokee, a dark skinned woman who was very stern, and placed my grandmother enrolled her at Shalaku,
Mm-hmm.
and the agriculture uh, boarding school, and so my grandmother went to school there, and but yeah, I mean, my mother, uh, having me and my older sister having grown up in Oklahoma, heard uh, a lot of different indigenous stories and tales of life there in Oklahoma. You know, the fact that you had so many different indigenous or native peoples that found home in what was known as Indian Territory, and later becoming the state of Oklahoma. Um, I heard tales of shape shifting. There was tales of an individual who was a male individual who was practicing witchcraft, and and this individual had shapeshifted into the form of an owl, and this owl was shot, and in the place of the owl was this man's body, uh, uh, that had been practicing witchcraft and things. So there was some very interesting stories that I grew up listening to. Um, my mother's father was a storekeeper off into the hollows and hills outside of Tahlequah, which is the
Mm-hmm.
capital of Cherokee Nation in Oklahoma. Um, he ran a store there in the really remote countries, providing goods and services, gasoline, uh, to predominantly traditional and the Cherokee peoples in those areas, and uh, who spoke predominantly this Cherokee language, and not English. But that's where the area that my mother had come from, and but there were tales the supernatural and paranormal, and the witnessing of orbs and things of that nature, even back in those days in the 50s. So
Thank you, Stan.
sure.
It's really interesting. No one ever mentions the matriarchal lines of the Native Americans. Navajos are very matriarchal. The women are revered as the order to govern the tribes. The man acts as, back in the time, women make the decision. We talk about every tribe is different. And so for the Navajo women had a strong presence in the clan there, or the tribe, depending on which clan you belong to. And the same thing. I come from a very, very strong maternal line, and it does show up in my ancestry a lot. The women were the ones that kept the families going. And and the men in our family would revere the women and never challenge the women. It was a respect thing, that we respect our grandmothers, respect our daughters, and you don't find that in a lot of cultures.
And I
The
think
women
that's
are,
what's missing in today's
yeah.
world and society, in that
Mm-hmm.
women are the ones that carry, an unborn infant in their body for 9 months. They're
Mm-hmm.
the ones that, once that child is given birth and that child is uh, uh, nourished and brought to childhood, looking out for that child's safety and well-being, making sure that child is properly clothed and safe. And I think in doing that, what women customarily are the ones who are cooking and feeding people, and I think women keep our societies and communities grounded and keep them on track as to what's important in our lives, healthcare and things of this nature. And but I think in our overall in the world, that's really what's missing today, and really needs to be changed, because what's happening over in Gaza, and the loss of life, and especially children and elderly, and there's got to be a better way of doing things, a better way of conducting ourselves as stewards of the earth. And so I really think we need to get back to that uh, way of life where the woman is equal or more with the society than they are, being treated today. And so
I think you're right, Stan. I think there was an equal society. I think one time, even going way back to the Egyptian culture, if you look at the hieroglyphics, how they stood towards one another, the royalty
right,
and the crook and the staff that they held like that meant equality, both
equality.
yeah, both the man and the women. So I think that has been a cultural loss there too, even in the Middle East community where women are not revered, and and for whatever reason that unbalance happened along the way. And I think it's happened in our culture a little bit along the way. But women are really strong in the Native way, and Navajo women are, have been told that they're mean.
Yeah.
The ones raised on the reservation, they're mean. And no, I think it's just basically their DNA. They come from that society where they want to, have an equal say in themselves.
Me
So,
and John seen that evident recently at the flea market when this grandmother, boy, she scolded this one young kid that I think, he's probably in his early 20s, and he smelled like he had been drinking and that.
oh,
And me and John were just laughing. Yeah, she scolded him. She let him know, and so
she's a wise one then. She was
right,
wise.
right.
Yeah, and in Native culture, a grandmother scolds you, you don't say nothing back.
No,
Mm-mm,
you don't.
mm-mm.
And
You
You
don't.
usually get the
yeah,
finger too.
this
Oh
guy actually turned around and told her, "Hey, bro," and, and she was not having it. Oh man,
yeah.
it was so funny. And he ended up getting out of line and going somewhere else because
Oh,
he
that's great. I
didn't want
love
to
it.
deal with her. But the bottom line, and I know we're running out of time, but the bottom line on a lot of this, man himself, and I'm talking about all man, is a spiritual being. And we too often we try to not bother with the spiritual side and live our
Right.
lives, but we run into people all the time that are seeking that spiritual touch.
Mm-hmm.
And so people seek it all their lives. They're looking
Right.
for it. They're trying to find that connection. And we've been fortunate because we've actually used that and incorporated into our daily lives to such an extent that it's part of us now. But that's one of the things that I see is that we tend to rely so much on science, and we hold scientists up on this huge pedestal, and we say this is that's the end all to everything, and it's not. There's a spiritual side. There's this dimensional side, multiverse, and we're just barely starting to come to grips and understand it.
And talking about men as well, like, so I've been doing like face-to-face events for over 12 years, and 90% of the people who come see me are female. There'll be the odd male, and throughout the years it's always been like that. Like, there's just 90% of them are female, and it's so good to see males. Actually, now more of them are coming to like the ceremonies and the drumming circles and
Mm.
stuff. And me personally, my favorite thing is to see someone who's been working, someone who's depressed at the start of the ceremony, towards the end, and how they change in their face, their look and the expression by just going into that frequency of faith or that frequency of love or prayer. That's what did it for me. Seeing them come in stressed, leaving with inspiration, and yeah, it's just beautiful seeing that.
Yeah,
It's not.
just so everybody knows, Stan's book is now being sold through Target for pre-order, also on Amazon and HarperCollins, and in Korea. You can pre-order it in Korea. So
I love it. I love it.
yeah, we couldn't read it because it was all in Korean, but it was rather funny to see that. Both of us are going to be at Contact in the Desert. We're there to see some other people, but we are not any of the speakers or any of the listed speakers. Let's put it that way. But if anyone misses, if anyone's not there, we might slip in and do a presentation. And then what else we got coming up?
We've got Judy Sakinaw's.
Yeah, Toronto, Canada. We'll be up
Mhm.
there around the 28th of June. And so if you're on the East Coast, hopefully we'll see you there. And, but Stan's book is going to be a bestseller, I think. And yeah, so we're looking forward to that.
Stan, do you want to talk a little bit about your book then, just for those listening?
Yeah, John and I we both began writing books in beginning in our careers as Navajo Rangers, these cases that refer to paranormal and supernatural uh, were our work. And so we began writing going way back, actually. For me, officially, it didn't start till I think July 24th of 2023, in and following my retirement from the Navajo Nation. And so then it became a full-time responsibility and job, having had a contract with HarperCollins Publishing. Um, it really, in what we talk about here on the podcast, goes back to a lot of those things that are alluded in the book. And what I'm hoping is that what I convey in the book, uh, that we really need to, as a human race, take a look at how we are living our lives. And we have grown to such a point where everything is materialistic. Everything is about money. And what's been alluded even in this own podcast is that these fundamentals, like the role of women in our society, and uh, really uh, really taking a look at who we are and how we live, and this is all inclusive of these things that people refer to as paranormal. We are surrounded by the supernatural and paranormal in our worlds and in our universe, and we need to have a better respect for our fellow man and get away from these very primitive ways of conducting ourselves with violence and war and uh, crimes, acts of rape, things like that against our fellow man and people. We just got to get away from that type of living life. That's very primitive. There are much more ways of enlightenment that we should be living our lives, helping each other, protecting the children, as opposed to how we're currently living. I think it can be achieved, but it, as with anything worthwhile, it takes some work. It doesn't always come easy in those kind of things. So I think we can, I think even like with these type of podcasts, we're trying to move in that direction to live better lives.
Yeah, we're not going to necessarily change the world, but we're going to change that little tiny portion where we're at if we can. And, maybe that'll keep spreading.
For the better.
Yeah, for the better. Definitely.
I think we're going into a time where people are hungry for the stories of the indigenous, because I think there's a loss of understanding within their own culture, their own family units. We are not the answer. We just have different experiences through each of our families. I grew up in a very political family. My mother and my grandmother were very political at the highest level, and try to change legislations and such for the betterment of the tribe and government. So yeah, and so I come from a very strong woman line, and but it's not about control. It's about heading forward into the future, teaching our ancestral ways. Because I'm learning every day. I learn from my own children, and they're hungry. They're hungry for the traditions, and as I share certain things as I was taught by my own mother, because she was raised on the reservation and then put in boarding schools. This has to move it forward. We need to learn about our culture so that we can keep the traditions and the ceremonies strong in each of our lineages. And we all come from different lineages. Oh, I mean, different tribes, and every tribe has their own cultural norms, as you say. And So I'm really looking forward to moving on with the Rangers and their law enforcement, and Stan's book is remarkably tells the story of our culture and the beginnings of the Navajo, and I really appreciated that a lot because it just depicts who he is and what he wants to bring forward about his own culture and not be ashamed of the culture that he belongs to, that who we belong to. And this is one of the reasons why we do this podcast.
Thank you for this.
We may have to do a second one on this.
I think so.
We barely touched the surface.
We didn't talk about ancestral spirits as well. So.
We didn't go there, did we, very much?
Next time.
Okay. So we look forward to maybe next week. What do you think, Dale? Could we come on next week,
idea.
guys?
Yeah. Really.
Part 2?
Part 2.
Yeah. Continued.
Yeah.
John and I may be joining you from California.
That's true, right?
We'll have to see.
Yeah, it'll be rough.
We'll see what your schedule allows.
Yeah.
We're getting a full schedule.
Just quickly like to say as well, those listening on all the YouTube channels, please drop a subscribe, a like, and a comment because we really appreciate your support as well. And already this podcast, has been incredible. And what we are now, episode 16. I just want to say thank you guys. You really inspired me, and I love listening to your stories. And everyone benefits from them as well.
Hey, can I make a little plug? Come join us. Become a member.
Yes.
Of the Paranormal Rangers, and we've got some perks there. And come and join our membership base.
So the link for the membership as well is in the description of the show. So if you just go in the description, you'll see all the links there available and the paranormal website as well.
Well, thank you for everybody for
we're at the top of the hour.
Taking a little time and listening to us. And
thank you.
Thanks, you guys.